Good evening and a very warm welcome to First Issues. Last week we looked at the makeup of the adolescent brain, taking it into account that this demographic makes up a significant portion of Botswana's population, an estimated 41%, from which future industry leaders are expected to come forth. Occupational therapist Frida Brambat-Deewada explained to us how a safe and secure environment is essential for the teenage brain to develop the necessary connections from the basic primal section from which it operates to the emotional part of the brain, and then finally to the all-important logical and empathetic portion of the brain that is capable of long-term planning and is only fully operational from the early 20s when one becomes an adult. Expecting a teenager to have the full faculties of an adult can have disastrous consequences. In the United States, where teenagers are issued with driving licenses at the age of 16, this demographic accounts for 1 out of 3 of road accidents. This is despite the fact that they account for only 14% of that population. Our expert says policymakers, teachers and parents should expect to function as the highest reasoning part of the brain for their adolescents, while essential pathways are still being formed in their brains. Tonight we hear from Frida the practical ways in which this can be done, wherein level-minded and driven individuals can be cultivated by the stakeholders responsible for shaping young minds. Welcome back to First Issues. Navigating a time in which new impulses and boundaries are being discovered and tested can either be a constructive period of growth or a negative one, depending on how the authority figures in one's life manage this time. We are therefore looking into the best way to guide and shape a developing mind. Frida begins tonight's conversation by giving us the best ways channels of communication and positive relationships can be forged with teenagers.
I think teenagers need to have the space to develop themselves and form their identity. There's a reason why the basic brain, your primitive brain, is the most active in teenage years. If they weren't taking risks, they wouldn't go out, want to become independent. They wouldn't go out and explore the world. They wouldn't go out and make friends and other things that they actually need when they are an adult. It's extremely important to have a network of friends, but if you are not going to function in that primitive brain, you're not going to have that oomph to just go out there and to actually make friends and hang out with friends. So you're actually trying to separate from your family, and it's in the teenage years where most of the age-like kids try to hang out together. And sometimes you'll look at a bunch of teenagers and you think, man, they're just sitting there doing nothing. But what they're actually doing is they're building on social skills and how to interact socially outside their family unit, which they've been used to, with other children their age. And initially it looks really clumsy, but you'll see as they grow older, they start making decisions together, they make choices, they start actually growing up, which shows you that their brain is also maturing. And it's the same with organizational skills. It's the same with prioritizing when it comes to homework or when it comes to explaining why you need to do a certain subject. They might think there's no point in studying this because what am I going to use it for later on? But I think as adults we just have to keep telling them that, look, we have been through teenagehood, we have experienced this, that or the other. It could be a granny, it could be a granddad, it could be an uncle. Doesn't always have to be the biological parents, but just the role model as an adult that actually is acting as the prefrontal cortex in that child's life. And it's only by practicing and by doing it again and again that you'll get a permanent set of wires in your brain. You know, you can say practice makes perfect, but in this situation would say practice makes permanent. So if your child maybe is hanging out with the wrong crowd, or they're really trying out, you know, they get into alcohol and drugs, you get all sorts of scenarios. it's really important to try as an adult to be present in that child's life, to discuss the consequences, to discuss the risks, to talk about your experiences, or maybe your husband's experiences, or, you know, the more stories they hear, they will start internalizing and reflecting on their own actions, because you're trying to put that mindfulness within that space of them being quite impulsive and so on.
What is the most destructive thing that both teachers and parents can do within a relationship with a teenager? What are the things that they do that really limit their ability to speak into a teenager's life?
You need to go all the way back to infancy in that respect. So not being present, maybe neglecting your child, abusing your child. And abuse could be physical, it could be mental, it could be emotional. So there's lots of different levels of abuse. Also being, you know, like sarcasm is something in a teenager that really hurts them deeply. And often when you look back at the negative experiences that you had as a child or as a teenager, it's often what somebody said to you at a particular moment, or what somebody made you feel at that moment, or the inadequacy that you felt. Because, you know, all people need to feel worthy of themselves. And if you're going through childhood and teenagehood not feeling worthy about yourself because you've always been either put down or belittled, or like I just mentioned, other more extreme cases, it's usually at teenagehood when they go into all this risky behavior that they do tend to go with a peer group of similar-minded children that might have experienced similar backgrounds. And it takes a really strong character to just stand up and say, look, I'm not going to go with this peer pressure. You know, although the most risky behaviors takes place when they're actually amongst age peers. So I think it's like twice the amount of risk when you're amongst children your age compared to when you're alone. You might actually reason more and think about it. Okay, maybe I'll just stick to the speed limit. But when you're now with a whole crowd of friends, you might just want to have that sense of feeling worthy in front of your friends, and therefore, who cares, I'm just going to do this, and not think of the actual consequences.
Dr. Laura Markham writes that discipline as we usually think of it backfires with teens. She says that if you come down like a sledgehammer, you can count on open rebellion. And that if you crack down on the rebellion, instead of listening to your child's reasons, you can count on your team becoming a very good liar and sneaking behind your back. What then, I am sure we all want to know, is to be done when it comes to disciplining teenagers?
One of the things is to sit down together with your teenagers. So rather than saying this is the way it is and should be, like I said, there need to be just a couple of basic rules that stay. But again, during the weekend, you might divert a bit. That, okay, there's still a time to go to bed and a time to wake up, even though it's weekend. But instead of going to bed at 8, you can go to bed at 10. But instead of getting up at 7, you might get up at 9. But not like stay in bed till 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon because you choose to do so. You're still part of a household, you're still part of a home environment that has rules. There's a time to eat, there's a time to take care of yourself, there's a time in terms of, you know, your personal hygiene. So have a bath every day, brush your teeth every morning. There's a time to do your homework. So again, there's a lot of conflict between parents and kids about how much homework, how long do I do my homework, and there's a lot of battle there. They're like, we're paying all the school fees and yet you're not doing your homework. And so one of the ways to deal with it is to say, okay, you stick to a certain amount of rules, maybe 5, 6 simple rules in our house, but to make it fair, because they will argue and so on, but when it's fair, it's fair. And teenagers love things just being fair. So you need to give a bit, but allow the input of the teenager as well. There's certain things you just don't negotiate. You have to have done your homework by then and then, or there's this much TV time a day, or there's this much input we expect of you within our own home environment, little chores that you're now entitled to do, just to get the family going, and that teenager is still part of that family unit. So you might find a teenager locking themselves up in their room the entire day, but there's still moments that you expect them to come out. When we're out and about, you're still part of the family. When we're getting visitors, you're still part of the family. You're not going to lock yourself up, and yet allow that space for them to also have to just be alone and just to do their own thing in their own private space.
Welcome back to the show as our guest, occupational therapist Frida Brambat-Deewada, continues to give us constructive ways with which to relate to and guide an adolescent. When it comes to discipline, most minds jump straight to corporal punishment or even the threat of physical punishment. What does the occupational therapy profession have to say about the effectiveness of this form of discipline?
If you have a child below the age of 2, when they really don't see the danger in, for example, touching an electrical wire or a socket, or they start sticking their fingers in, at that moment a tiny smack on the finger might actually get that message across, because their language is not yet that, or a firm no, take them away from that situation. But beyond that, we really do not believe that punishing a child in a physical way is going to create a healthy relationship between the adult and the child. You're using your physical strength and size and whatever to belittle a child. At the same time, there's a lot of other ways that you can connect with a teenager. If you hit the child, you're actually going into a circle where the child will back off and off and off, and they will revert to all sorts of other behaviors that might not be visible to you because they're scared of you. Or it might come to a point where they'll rebel so much because this is not treating them fair. Do you make a child feel worthy? Do you make a child feel accepted? Do you make a child feel emotionally happy when you're hitting them? You're hurting them physically, you're hurting them emotionally, you're scarring them probably for life. And it's the onset of a lot of psychiatric issues, a lot of depression in children when they reach teenagehood. So a lot of these kind of extreme responses could result, and I'm not saying it's going to result in everybody, but it could result in overdosing in alcohol, not knowing your limits, going into drugs, into sex at an early stage. There's a whole lot of behaviors that can come out in troubled children. And I think corporal punishment is just not the way to go. And it's never going to get that child to feel connected with you. Whereas what they need is a listening ear, they need a calm approach, they need understanding, and they need acceptance in terms of, look, I am what I am and I'm trying to become who I want to be. And we need to give them that foundation to try and help them along the road. You can't always stop them from doing anything, but we can give them suggestions, and we can talk to them about the possible consequences and what are the risks. And you can sit with them and do research about a particular topic, when it comes to more severe cases. Look at the consequences. When you're going to take drugs, this is what could happen to you. If you're going to go into alcohol in an early stage, the chances that you will become an adult and overuse that, it's quite high. So you're trying to give them the building blocks, and hopefully eventually that will translate in their own prefrontal cortex. And when they are there to make decisions or prioritize, they will revert back to what they were taught as supportive adults in their own environment, or with supportive adults in their environment.
Which forms of discipline then do you approve of? Do you take away liberties?
You could be looking into things like that. I mean, they're so into their cell phones or into their time watching TV, or anything that they're really, really into. You can actually take that away from them, and maybe for a certain amount of time. So it's kind of like taking away what they would really, really want at that stage, or getting them to reflect and maybe write about what they've done. Each teenager is different, each family background is different, the culture that we're growing, we're in a multicultural setup, and kids are exposed to a whole lot of different things as well. And it's also really important to acknowledge the effort that they put into certain things that they try. So they might try, but they might not meet your expectations. But we still need to celebrate the fact that they've tried. And we also need to, it's celebrating the effort rather than the end result. And also for them to become more aware of their own actions. So it's really that talking through certain incidents, but still having your boundaries. And if you've crossed those boundaries, then there are consequences.
You said not to view teenagers as adults. But I doubt you mean that we should now look at them as we should baby somebody at this lifestyle.
No, absolutely not. I think we need to treat them as respectful as any other child. Any child deserves to be respected. Like, for example, you can't expect the unexpectable of them. So if you suddenly expect your 14 or 15-year-old to do all sorts of things within your home environment or within, taking care of the siblings to the extent that it's actually almost taking over an adult role, it's not fair on the child, because the child is still a child and he needs to go through the phases of allowing himself to be a child. And we need to allow that. So we can't, yes, we can expect them to maybe take care of their sibling for an hour, but not for like 3 days because you're going on a business trip. It's not fair on that child. You're putting a whole lot of responsibilities that they actually are not able to manage yet. And always to still have adults around teenagers to monitor what they're doing, to monitor what they're looking at, to monitor what they're seeing on internet, what they're doing, what they're not doing, who they're hanging out with, who they're not hanging out with. So it's really that connection. Stay connected with your teenager at all times. Be there as a communication board, that they can come and talk to you. Don't think that it's a personal attack when they say, I hate you and I don't. It's an impulsive response. It's like a toddler screaming and shouting and whatever. How do you deal with that? You either ignore, or eventually when they're out of the tantrum, you talk about it, you deal with it. And it's also very important to reward good behavior, as little as that good behavior might be. Reward them with good behavior, and then you can say, okay, you'll have extra time for this, or on Saturday you can stay up longer for this, or you are allowed to go to that party or to this movie, or whatever is that is going to work for them.
At that, we conclude our exploration of this topic. Welcome back to the show. It is the beginning of the year, and policymakers, like a lot of us should have done at this point, but on a relatively much smaller scale, have put a lot of work and thought into deciding the objectives and goals for 2015. Financial goals and decisions that the nation is to hear delivered live and direct from here next Monday. Botswana has gained a reputation for having sound financial management policies, and we expect to see much of the same. We look to the experts, however, to see if we are right to do so. Our contributors for this portion are Senior Research Fellow at the Botswana Institute for Development Policy Analysis, BIDPA, Dr. Grace Huitsimudimo Tabengwa, and Research Manager at FNB Botswana, Moatlhodi Sebabole. What do they expect to hear from the Minister of Finance and Development Planning next week? And what is the basis for their predictions?
In terms of predictions, I think to start there will be just trying to give a bit of a background on the current status that we are heading towards this budget speech, the status that we are in at the moment. At the moment, we are in a backdrop, a bit of a push and pull in terms of the global environment. You have a situation where you have a lot of developed markets that are struggling with deflation. You've got a situation where the economically dependent economies on oil are taking a hit as a result of the slump in oil prices. You've got a situation where the yields are falling in the development markets. So if you funnel down that to the current economy of Botswana and what also the minister has got to take as a backdrop of doing this budget, is a situation where, yes, we are getting to benefit from a falling inflation as a net importer of oil, and we are getting to benefit from, we have benefited from a low interest rate environment for the longest time. So these are some of the macros, and a stable GDP growth. It's the macros that the minister has in the back of his mind when delivering his budget.
Currently, Botswana faces a number of economic challenges. The one that we feel that should be a priority in terms of even the allocation to the government is the strategies for addressing the high unemployment, especially among the youth, which is coming out to be quite a challenge to the nation. But I also expect challenges of poverty to be given prominence in the allocations of the budget, because poverty remains one of the national challenges in the economy. One of the key challenges that Botswana faces is also of the inadequate human capital in the economy, which is impacting on competitiveness. So I believe that that's a challenge that should be given prominence in how it is being addressed. Of course, the emphasis is on the quality and the requisite human capital that the investors would need, and also the kind of human capital that is required to unlock the competitiveness challenges and productivity challenges that the economy needs. The other challenges, of course, that are high on the agenda in the nation are those of the power and the water challenges, where we have seen inadequate power supply impacting on the productivities of the business firms and the private sector economy.
But then what I anticipate there is a big chunk of the budget going towards infrastructure development. And particularly there, you've got just recently Parliament adopting to extend NDP 10 a year further. Remember, we're supposed to go into this budget with also mindful that the NDP 10 will be coming to an end in that fiscal year 2015-16. Now the fact that we have extended it by another year means you've got a couple of projects that we've got to actually complete. I have in mind the North-South Career water projects. The airports are still undergoing through major developments there and there. We've got a water and energy sector which needs boosting and need to operate to the maximum. So you've got a government which will be dealing with actually accelerating the completion of that, as well as paving the way for NDP 11, as well as the Vision 2016, which is coming to an end this fiscal year. So in there, you've got the deliverables that you've got to cover there. So that's why I say in here, we'll really see a lot of focus on infrastructure development in particular, as well as your other thematic areas where the government will be looking to include promote a more inclusive growth, and they will do that through different projects which will try to cover the wider economy, your development of the agriculture sector, your development of the tourism sector, because it's just last week that Central Statistics have indicated they're going on a year's tour around farmers in the country to try and see where the challenges are and try to see how they can assist. So over and above infrastructure, we'll see government pushing for promoting a more inclusive growth and an economic diversification away from your mining, your traditional mining revenues.
We leave it at here tonight and look forward to hearing, along with the rest of the country, how true these predictions are. Until next week and another issue of interest, I'm Namita Samakula, the team behind First Issues, and our sponsors, First National Bank, wish you a good night and pleasant viewing.